Love filters with quantities of it, and for knowledge if anyone burns, we're keeping a very small profit, a profit who brings us unbounded returns. For he can prophesy with the wink of his eye, peep with security into futurity. Hello, hi, welcome to the show, everybody. This is the traditional post-running the game live stream. No lead-in, no intro, I don't think, because I wanted this video to still be pretty watchable, even on the YouTubes afterwards. And on Twitch, we normally run, 10 minutes of like Time Rider nonsense just to give folks something to listen to while they are getting into chat, responding to the alert. Let me let Twitter know that we're live, and typically we cover what we talked about in the live stream in case anybody has questions. But we can talk about anything, typical subjects that produce a lot of interesting discussion are obviously D&D, but also writing. I'm a professional writer, so people often ask me questions about writing, or writing in games, or game production, analog game production, digital game production, MCDM, how things are going at MCDM. We can talk about Kingdoms of Warfare. I hope there are lots of people here right now that don't know how it's going, and it's the thing that's currently taking up all my time, and also the thing I'm most excited by. www, hey, we're live. Hey, we're live on the YouTubes. On the YouTubes. We do this because a lot of people don't like Twitch. I don't really know why. Things about it annoy them. And I don't really experience any difference between when I'm watching like a YouTube live stream or Twitch live stream. They seem like basically the same technologies to me. But yeah, people get really like, I hate Twitch. I'm like, oh, that's fine. We'll stream on YouTubes every once in a while. On the YouTubes. Come hang out. Ask questions. Mods, I will be checking the Discord, the Matt Discord thing. So if you see any good questions while I'm doing all this nonsense, I should have typed this earlier. Twitch.tv/M, the C, the D, and the M. No. Was I inspired by the Dictator's Handbook? No, I was inspired by decades of reading history. Much of which gets referenced in the video, or indeed, there's one of the videos. Maybe it was Politics of Peace, the one where we talk about William Yale. No, it must be the Politics of War, where there's a pretty substantive bibliography. Wait, somebody just tagged me. Ponius, I'm not sure that I don't. So Ponius, I have to remember that folks watching this after the fact cannot see the. We got to make sure my screen is composed well. Actually, I seem like it's cutting my head off. There are many people who would like to see my head cut off, but I think the easiest way to fix this is... Yeah. Hello, hi. As far as you know, I just moved my chair. All motion is relative. Let me pop out chat so I can read it. Ponius asks, I discussed alignment quite a bit in the latest video. Yeah, sure. Because that's always how my friends and I interpret it when we would look at it. I'm going back to the 80s, so this is how old this idea is, keep in mind. We were teenagers, so we didn't have an incredibly sophisticated view of this stuff. But when you looked in the monster manual and it said like, oh, this monster is, this alignment, we always presumed that meant that society, right? And that just because you could look up, I don't think the modern monster manual has this, but older monster manuals had humans in them. Among other things, or elves or dwarves in them, and so they would have an alignment, and we weren't dumb. We knew that just because it said dwarves or lawful neutral, you could make a dwarf character that was chaotic evil if you wanted to. There was no restriction against that, as far as I know. And so obviously, therefore, these were cultural. When there was looking at a holotype of something, these were cultural. And I always assumed that the societies were basically lawful or neutral. And I think that's, I think subconsciously, without really thinking about it, that like, it's the difference between mores and folkways, that the law-chaos axis was a mores, and then good and evil were folkways, because that can change. Obviously, we have seen in our lifetime the governments, without any revolution happening, governments go from being good to evil, right? Or neutral to evil, depending on your point of view. But that didn't change whether or not they were lawful or chaotic. So lawful or chaotic being the really kind of the real label that we applied to nation states. And I don't really think we talked a lot about neutrality. That wasn't something I don't really think in terms of, are there quote unquote neutral. If there is if people are trying to stop a megalomaniacal dictator and you sit out is that a neutral thing? The fact that you didn't jump into the war, a war to stop tyranny, is that neutral? In fact, a lot of the instances in history where someone or some organization or some country has tried to remain neutral, it's because they were profiting off of the war. So is that neutral? So I don't really think in terms of neutrality when it comes to nation states. But that's a great question for the chat. And now I have to come here to the hey, I'll be monitoring this channel. If you see any good questions that I missed. And if you post a question a couple times and I don't get to it, that's probably because I read it and I was like, I don't want to talk about that. Excuse me. Pardon me. We are, by the way, happily supported by the music in the background, which hopefully folks can hear, which is used by permission from State Azure. State Azure, who I want to be when I grow up. So, hello, Costa Rica. Juan Pablo, glad you could join us. Do we need more artists? That's a good question. We need certain artists. I don't know what a PHP is. It's a protocol, I think. 125 PHP from Joseph Ramola. Oh, thank you very much, Joseph. We appreciate it. Any donations help keep the lights on. Any dialogue I would steal from Lighthouse? I think we got a Lighthouse video percolating, although I haven't really started a script on it. But we're going to release a new video next week on The Shape of Water, which has nothing to do with gaming or D&D or anything like that. It's just, I love movies and I love talking about them. And when I first saw Shape of Water, I wrote a script for a video and I never finished it. And so because we're here in this downtime where we don't go into the office anymore, which means video production is impacted more than anything else because of COVID-19, because I'm no longer in the office with Jerry every day. And can just say, hey, let's go record a video. If I want to record a video with Jerry, there's actually now quite a lot of production that has to happen in order for him and I to both be safe and not be in danger of infecting one or the other. Knock on quite nice bamboo. So I unmothballed the Shape of Water script because when I wrote it, I didn't want to be in it. I just want it to be like a classic movie YouTube video essay where you don't see this thing. And Jerry wasn't super comfortable sourcing his own interpretation of scenes from my dialogue, right? It would be me picking scenes to put behind The Shape of Water, but I don't have time to do that. And so now that we're in downtime, Jerry's like, well, actually now I have nothing else to do, so sure. And so he killed it. He went from being, I don't really feel comfortable me picking scenes to put behind your text to, well, I've got nothing else to do, and he hit a home run. I was like, holy shit, dude, this is an adult stream now. I was like, holy moly, dude, that was really cool. So the Shape of Water video is going to go up next week. People are going to complain because it's not D&D, but I've got quite a few D&D videos percolating, including a video on traps, which I'd like to get recorded next week. So we'll see. I'm kind of slowly emerging from Kingdoms and Warfare nonsense. What would I say is an example of a good, true, neutral character? Well, we talked about this in a video. Maybe it's time to do another alignment video. Alignment is evergreen, by the way. It will never stop being something people want to talk about. Garrick from Deep Space Nine is awesome. Like there's a great quote. There's a brilliant quote. I almost swore again. There's a brilliant quote there's a million great quotes from DS9. I think it's the best written modern Star Trek series. By a long shot, where Julian Bashir says, don't you ever tell the truth? And he says, that's a mistake you continually make, Doctor. I don't believe there is such a thing. In other words, he doesn't say, I tell the truth when it's convenient to me, or why tell the truth when a lie would do, right? He just says, I don't believe in the idea of truth in fiction. That's you guys' nonsense. Garrick from Deep Space Nine is the quintessential, I think, the quintessential neutral character. There are mods in here who I don't know who are, because they don't have to, but they do use their real names. Do I like The Lord of the Rings? Do I like the Lord of the Rings? Yeah, I quite like the Lord of the Rings. I am somebody. Good work with the Black Panther video. Thank you, Bjorn. Thank you for the support. There was a $5 one that passed by that I didn't notice. Do I like the Lord of the Rings? I quite like the Lord of the Rings. I have a lot of affection for it. The BBC radio production, which you can find online if you know where to look. The BBC radio production, which is a radio play, so it's not a narrator. It's actors reading dialogue and sound effects and Foley, like there was a play happening on stage, but you had your eyes closed. So your sound effects and stuff, and there's even some music in the background. I think is awesome. I listen to it all the time. I love it. Yeah, I love the Lord of the Rings. The books, the movies are a kind of fun Disney ride version of the books, and I like going to amusement parks and riding on roller coasters. So there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But I'm not as critical of the movies as some people are, but I don't embrace them unreservedly like other people do. But the thing that I'm really a fan of is Tolkien and his philosophies and the way he wrote. The way that dude wrote and the decisions he made as a creator resonate with me much more deeply than the actual work he produced. And I quite like the work he produced. I'm glad you liked Mimnos, Raymond. We've talked about putting Mimnos on the second channel, but we would just get hammered with copyright strikes. And part of what made Mimnos awesome was that it was ephemeral. One of my cats, like, all I can hear is rip, and I'm like, what are my cats doing? Beyond Black Panther, asks Kestrel Rose. Beyond Black Panther, what media would I advocate for in pursuit of making one's factions and politics more interesting? Well, Dune is a pretty good example of some pretty complex political machinations. And it also wears its heart on its sleeve. There's a great scene where Duke Leto... Excuse me, I have to go punish a cat. Who is that? And what do you... How do I stop? Oh. It was just an Amazon package that was trash, so you're fine, Vince. Say hello to all the people. It's Vince. Vince is like, I don't like to be on camera. I do not. Vince's best cat. Hello. He's so big. You're like a big panther. You are like a black panther. I just did a video about you. Yeah, Dune's pretty good. There are probably other examples that people in chat could think of. It's a good question. Hello, South Africa. If we ever... South Africa would be quite a long ways to go for a convention. But it's not beyond the bounds of reason. If we can find ourselves in a post-vaccine world. The chat... The chat just jumped out straight to the bottom. Yeah, we'll make more progress on the Dune video. Have I played Vampire the Masquerade? Yeah, I played Vampire when I was a younger person. I see Dead Llamas. Campaign on the High Seas. Finding that rolling an encounter die for every hex they move is becoming cumbersome, but I don't want to remove it. Can I... But I don't want to remove it. Can I think of a way to condense the encounter roll? Well, no, not off the top of my head. I can't think of a way to... rolling a die and looking at the number, I can't think of anything quicker than that. That being said, I do think that I've been thinking a lot about this. I see a Dead Llamas. I'm happy that somebody brought this up. Thank you for the $20, by the way. I know somebody said 25.25. Did I thank Bjorn for the 25.25? Thank you for the 25.25. In the year 25.25. Daffy Sullivan, I watch other people. That's the great thing. Like, if I experience DM burnout, playing is the number one way to recover from DM burnout. The next best way is just go watch something like Critical Role or The Chain of Acheron. That really gets my juices flowing. I don't know of a way to condense an encounter roll down beyond it's just a die roll. But I have thought a lot about, I guess I do have an answer for you. Because what you're asking is, rolling an encounter die for every hex they move is becoming cumbersome. Well, the problem there is that you're translating the notion of exploration into rolling a die, looking up the result on a table, and that tells you what's in this hex. And I submit to you that there might be that the players don't make decisions there. There's no player choice there. The players' skills don't factor into things. So a more robust system. The issue is it doesn't need to be condensed. It needs to be expanded and shifted from the dungeon master rolling to the players making decisions. And that's what I just described is an incredibly high level, abstract, no details included example of what exploration would be like if exploration were actually a pillar of D&D, which it is not. It's not a pillar. If it's a pillar of D&D, then everything is a pillar of D&D. Manufacturing T-shirts is a pillar of D&D because you could do that if you wanted to in D&D. You can make a roll. So yeah, I do think that the goal should be to make exploration fun and rewarding and come up with good rewards for it and good motivations for players to do it, whether you're on the high seas or whether you're in a forest or in a vast expanse of desert. And I think that could be done. I would accept that design challenge. I think there are lots of ways you could take a 5th edition D&D and sort of graft more 4E onto it, which they said they were going to do. They said there was going to be a module where you could make combat more tactical. That never materialized. So maybe it's up to companies like us to do something like that. Make combat more interesting, make exploration real, which means bake mechanics into it, and make negotiation real and role-playing. Make role-playing a multi-layered, sophisticated process whereby you can, interact with people in a more interesting way than just the DM role-playing, and give your characters mechanics and options and things that are just as useful in exploration or role-playing as the ones they already have in combat. Thank you, I see Dilemmas. Joshua Lee, for $5, says that I got him to rewatch and enjoy a Marvel movie. Yeah, Black Panther is super worth rewatching. It's I first time I watched Black Panther, I wasn't super impressed. I'm not a fan of that. There's this incredibly stilted dialogue that is Ryan Coogler's idea of how royalty would talk. But for which a much better example is go watch The Crown. But after having watched it once, I did not like it. I would have ranked it along with like the Doctor Strange's or the Ant-Man's, where I'm like, okay, I'm glad I watched that, but I'm not dying to go see it again. But then I did go see it again, and the second time is when I was like, wow, there's a lot going on in this movie that I didn't really notice. It's like Ryan Coogler was afraid that he was never going to get a chance to make another Marvel movie, so he just packed everything into it that he could. What alignment is Sherlock Holmes? It's always dangerous to try to ascribe alignment to fictional characters that aren't D&D characters, because the alignment system is part of the D&D universe. Law and chaos are primordial forces, older than good and evil, in the Dungeons and Dragons meta universe. And they don't exist in Sherlock. So, there isn't a lot of evidence that Sherlock believes in... Like, he definitely seems unburdened with a responsibility to follow rules, or that rules apply to him. And if you're somebody who thinks I don't need rules are for other people, then you're probably not lawful. Do I think Daniel Balfour, that name seems familiar. Daniel Balfour says, do I think Kingdoms of Warfare is friendly to people who are just starting D&D? No, but I think it will be attractive to people that are just starting D&D. I think if you've, I think it was Kale Reader. Somebody asked this on our Discord, by the way. You should check out our Discord. It's quite good. And the answer was, you should probably have a couple of adventures under your belt. In other words, I don't necessarily think it's going to be advanced D&D, but it's definitely not, I've never played before. However, I think anyone who understood D&D, who opened up Kingdoms of Warfare and started looking through it, would be like, oh, I want these things. I want these things. It's just more work. I don't think Kingdoms of Warfare is orders of magnitude more complexity in terms of, this is so much more brain I have to brain so much more. No, it's not. In some ways, it's simpler than regular D&D, the rules in it, but it's definitely more. Like, I think it was Pesto was saying, this is going to add 90 minutes to a boss battle. Now, I think we've managed to get that down to maybe 30 minutes. And I believe that domain powers, organization powers, will speed things up because they give your party, they give your characters in your group access to quite cooler abilities that only work in boss battles. And that should speed things up, right? If you could point at a bad guy and they die because you're a team of assassins and you took the assassin ability, then that's going to speed things up quite a lot. Hang on a minute, let me see if I can catch up with chat. Have you ever tried Exalted? I don't think so. Or any non-vampire World of Darkness products. We played vampire and werewolf and wraith kind of all melded into one world, which is kind of how it's supposed to be. Did I like any of them? I like the world a lot. I found this is true of a lot of RPGs. I found the math of the system to be unrigorous. And that never really made me happy. But rigor is not the most important thing. Don't. Will there be, Mark Helms, what a great question for $15. Will there be another adventure design video? Yes. In fact, that's going to be the next big video. The Traps video is not going to be this big production the way Black Panther was. There was somebody who said something incredibly complimentary in the comments. They said that they felt like these last 15 or 20 running the game videos were like head and shoulders above. I know there are lots of people who miss the very early days of running the game where it was just me extemporaneously speaking direct to camera, but I don't like those videos. I think they are incredibly repetitive. And as a result, bad bang for buck. If I were going to remake those videos, they'd be shorter because they'd be written to a script and you'd get the point across faster. They'd be clearer. People would be they'd higher utility. We did a live stream at Gen Con that was how to build an adventure. And A, I think there's a better video there. B, it was a live stream and the video quality was terrible. We didn't have control over the lighting or anything. So I really want to go back and say, all right, let's put an adventure together. And that might turn into like a series because there's lots of different ways to build an adventure, or maybe better to say there are lots of different kinds of adventure that you might want to build. So that that's after the Trap video, I think, I've got lots of ideas for videos. The thing is that running the game is not only sort of on hold while we wait for Kingdoms and Warfare to be done, which we've made quite a lot of progress on. I definitely feel like there is light at the end of the tunnel. That's a loaded phrase. But what the hell was I just talking about? Oh, and COVID-19. But also, I'm not running D&D, and what I really want to do is get away from campaign diaries because those are super unpopular. Get away from campaign diaries and just try to make run D&D. Think about what I learned, translate that into a running the game video. Hey, here's what I learned playing D&D last night, and turn these very specific lessons into universal things. And doing a video on adventure design is certainly going to happen between now and then. Philip Bush, thank you for the $5. The silver you would have got there without me. Yeah, you just didn't know that. Luminous asks, do I think any Royal Guard organization will inherently devolve into a Praetorian Guard style kingmaker? They go and they find Claudius hiding behind a curtain and they're like, wait, aren't you the cousin of the emperor? All right, you're king now. I don't think it has to, but it could. I mean, these people all want to maintain their own power. So the Praetorian Guard, the Royal Guard, Okoye doesn't say this. I don't think she's motivated like this. This is not her character. But certainly, if there's no king, do we need a Royal Guard? So the Royal Guard has a huge vested interest. The existence of the king and the character of the king becomes an existential crisis for any Royal Guard. So how are they going to go watch the diplomacy video and think about how is the Royal Guard going to behave? Any plans for follower cards? I think Raymond means like the retainer cards in either a supplement or in the magazine. No plans for it. It's a good idea. But I do have plans to go back once Kingdoms and Warfare is done. Kingdoms and Warfare, I feel, and I'm not, my opinion isn't the only one that matters. Like now your opinion is going to matter quite a lot more than mine once this book is out. But I think Kingdoms and Warfare is orders of magnitude more robustly designed than Strongholds and Followers. And so I really want to go back to Strongholds and Followers and revise it quite substantially, I think, in order to bring it in line with everything we've learned about 5th edition and design and all that nonsense. And so in doing that, we'll probably revise how retainers work. We might give them hit points. It's going to depend on what people say. Retainers were a very controversial piece of design during playtesting. I believed in them very strongly. The playtesters did not like them. Or they didn't like certain aspects of it that I wanted to double down on. And it turned out that the people who used the book quite like retainers. They're one of the more popular things from the book. So seeing people use them, I'm more inclined to revise the rules for retainers, listening to those people who are like, I love the retainers. I just wish ... Ooh, okay, well, we can go fix that. And then at that point, yeah, we could do a bunch of new followers. And in fact, it would be a great article for Arcadia. Probably some of you folks who don't follow the Twitch streams, which I do not blame you. If you don't like Twitch, you don't like Twitch. I'm not going to try and convince you to follow us on Twitch. But I have long, this is not any kind of official announcement. An official announcement would be a YouTube video. Wait, this is a YouTube video. A scripted YouTube video. But we've had a Patreon for a long time, and when I first started the videos, I had no interest in doing a Patreon because I thought Patreon would be bad bang for buck for the patrons. But as the channel grew, more and more people were like, look, I already bought your novels, or I already bought Strongholds and Followers. I just want to throw more money at you. And we were like, well, all right, we'll start a Patreon. There's not really going to be anything on there, but there are lots of very popular Patreons where it's literally just, I just want to give you $5 a month to say, keep doing what you're doing. I love it. Like AVE's Patreon. I don't think you get anything for backing that. So I put that up there, and I made sure that when we ran D&D, I would put my notes up there, which, is helpful to some people, I think. But ultimately, once you've read my notes once or twice, you get it. Right? And you don't need, you go, oh, I wish more DMs would do this. I wish more DMs would put their notes up online, because I think that, it's that great quote, a man who has a watch knows the time. A man with 2 watches is never sure. Once you have 2 examples, if you only have 1 example, you think this is how it has to be done. But once you have 2 examples, then you're like, oh, actually, there's quite a lot of different ways to do this, and now I can pick and choose which way is my way. So yeah, we put my notes up there on Patreon, but I've never been happy with that, even though our patrons seem to be, even in the middle of a financial crisis, we haven't lost any patrons. People are like, no, but there's a goodly number of people who are perfectly happy to give us $5 a month as long as we keep doing what we're doing. But I hate that. I want to give those people something. So I was thinking about what could we do for the patrons, and unfortunately there isn't a way to say, like, it's very few technologies work together. Patreon works with Discord, that's nice, but it doesn't work with Twitch or YouTube or Shopify, so our capacity to kind of reward patrons with other things we do is somewhat limited, or that just technology doesn't exist to do it. And I was having a conversation with our art director, Jason Hasenauer, who you may have met if you've watched the Twitch live streams, because he's been on a couple of them. And I was like, what, why, how, we're talking about art and about magazine art, spoiler, and about why Dragon magazines in the 80s, the covers looked so much cooler than any art does now. And Jason, who's a brilliant genius artist across multiple categories, said, it's because they weren't very good artists. He just spent hours and hours going and looking at all these famous 80s illustrators. And he goes, the thing is, a lot of these folks are self-taught, you can see. Or if they went to school, they'd probably already developed their style before they went to school. And so their composition's not great. We're way better at composition now. than they were in the 80s. Their anatomy is not awesome. Their color palette is really weird often. We're better now. We're better artists now than those folks were there. And there's thanks to industries like Magic the Gathering, collectible card games, and video games, where there's now a need for artists. When there wasn't really in the 80s. If you were a fantasy artist in the 80s, you basically went and did book covers, or you did cover art for D&D. He goes, so what they did was they made up for it in rendering, which I, being a naive boob who doesn't know anything about art, would say detail. And he's like, don't call it detail. That's not what that is. A lot of what would look to me to be a very low detail drawing has actually quite a lot of detail in it, because I look at it and I go, oh yeah, I can see the shape of the dragon's head, and I can see the shape of its wing, and are there bat fingers at the end of it? He goes, that's detail. Detail is design. Even though this artist may only have spent a couple of hours on, thank you, John, because I'm in the middle of a monologue right now, so I can't see chat and I can't see people posting, so please keep me up to date in the Discord. He's like, to me, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I thought this was super fascinating, right? He's like, this picture that you poo-poo, this picture that Matt Colville poo-poos because you say there's no detail in it, it's a dragon in flight, and the reason you're poo-pooing it is because the artist probably only spent a couple of hours on it. But in that time, that artist drew a dragon. And you can see, is it a hexapod? Is it a tetrapod? How do its wings work? How does its head work? You can see all that. That's design. That's what these concept artists are for. They are designing the shape and the anatomy of the dragon. You don't need to draw every scale for that. In fact, that would be a waste of time. That would be dumb. The people you're showing to know what scales look like, right? So going from concept art to production art, which is to say stuff that should be in front of like a 3D model, well, the modeler is going to add all this detail because the modeler knows, I know what eyeballs look like, I know what teeth look like, or maybe the shape of the jaw is one of the things they did. He goes, so what you like, Matt Colville, is rendering, which is how much time did they spend layering on more, not just detail and line work, which is something that you like a lot, but lighting, right? There's all sorts of stuff that goes into rendering, as he puts it. And he goes, so these 80s covers are just super, super well rendered because that's what they spent all their time doing, right? They did not spend a lot of time on like composition and anatomy and stuff like that because they were probably self-taught. But you look at it in like edge to edge, there's just tons of detail, right? And he's like, I like that stuff too. And I wish there was more people doing that kind of stuff these days. And there are some, but there are very few. He goes, there's just no demand for that. So you take this thing of Matt wishing that we could provide something for the patrons and talking about those awesome magazine covers from the 80s, and somehow I synthesized these two ideas and said we should do a monthly magazine for the patrons. And I think that's actually a bad way of looking at it. It's just going to be an MCDM, a monthly MCDM magazine for 5th edition. It's going to be all 5th edition content for now. And it's $5. It's $5 a month. And the way you get it is you come to Patreon. I summon thee. You go to Patreon and you give us $5 and you get a magazine. And if you only want one, then you cancel after that. And that is going pretty well. We've got 2 cover artists. So the plan is to do 3 issues and stop. We're going to do 3 issues, maybe September, October, November, but maybe October, November, December, depending on how these things come online. We're going to do 3 issues, and each issue is going to have 3 or 4 articles in it. Each article is going to be between 2,500 and 3,000 words. And then we're going to stop. And we're going to look and see, how did that work? What did we learn? What did people like? We'll let people vote on which articles they liked best. And we stop and look back at issues 1 through 3 and see how did it move the needle? Did we attract more patrons? We're going to, by the way. The question is, we're spending quite a lot of money on this. We want to get really good art. We want to get really good writing. We pay better. I think I can say this. People in chat may correct me. I think we pay a better award rate than anyone else in this industry. Maybe if you worked for like Games Workshop. I don't know if they have freelance writers. So we're paying quite a lot of money to do this. The question is, and even if we spend all this money on these 3 issues and we get more patrons, but it doesn't pay for this, that doesn't mean we're not going to do it anymore. I actually don't mind if it loses a little bit of money depending on what other value we get out of it, because we could get quite a lot of value out of this. And the stated goal is Matt Colville isn't writing this stuff. I've got stuff to do. So I'm not writing these articles. I may contribute stuff. I have ideas for articles, so I may contribute stuff in my spare time. But we're working with a experienced freelancer who is valuable for a lot of reasons. Not only have we worked with them before, but they have their finger on the pulse of the freelancing community. Not only the freelancing community, but also, they are fans of writers and artists and developers who are not generic white dudes, which we already have at MCDM. We're full up. We're full up on generic white dudes. Thank you very much. And so that makes me happy, is getting to support and get the viewpoints of other artists and writers. I think that's incredibly valuable. So that stuff is all going super well. In fact, when I'm done talking to you folks, we're going to go and look at. I'm going to go read a draft of one of the first articles for the first issue that's already been submitted and revised once. So that process is working great. We've sourced 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 articles. I didn't have to do anything. So this is going to get done without taking any time away from any of the other stuff we do. Now, the flip side of that is we don't know how much demand there is for not Matt Colville nonsense coming from MCDM. The patrons may be like, I'd rather just more Matt Colville nonsense than these other people's nonsense. Okay, that's something good to know. But I would then want to know, how do you perceive the difference? Because I can very easily go and take someone's article and kind of revise it or append it and add my own stuff to it without having to rewrite an entire article. So Wandering Weed, yes, we are always going to be looking for more or better writers. But I'm the editor in chief. I'm the one who sets the tone. I'm the one who sets the tone and off topic. That is off topic. Daffy Sullivan, hang on a second. Well, your friend is awesome, Daffy Sullivan. Thank you for the donation. Any advice for somebody who wants to chase their dreams but they're scared to do so? Don't live your life in fear. Don't be motivated. Be cautious, be smart, but don't be motivated by fear. I ride my bike 20 miles a day now, 20 miles a day. And and every time I do it, I'm like, I could die. Like, this is crazy. All it takes is one person texting on their cell phone and the light goes out. In a way that I don't feel when I'm in my car. My car has airbags. And every time I think about that, I'm like, yeah, but do I want to live my life in fear? Ashley, where do I think the first off-world person will be born? Probably Mars. Where? Probably Mars. Because I think that any space agency responsible enough to manage to get people into orbit would probably restrict. We know there's a great book called Packing for Mars that you should go check out, which is just a blast to read. It's so much fun and also incredibly well researched and documented. And it's all about the challenges, the sociological challenges and the physical challenges of getting into space for humans and going to Mars, and what we know and what we've learned over the past 40, 50 years of space travel. And giving birth in orbit would be bad. It would be bad. A baby developing in microgravity would not come out right, because bones need gravity to work when they're developing. And the closest gravity we have is Mars. And even then, I think Mars's gravity is probably still too light. But at that point, if you're on Mars, if you're living on Mars, could we stop people from having babies? We can probably stop people from having babies by restricting who gets onto the spaceships. When we're talking about low Earth orbit or we're talking about the moon. But anyway. Yeah. We're 6 weeks in, and I think my players like to be railroaded. Yeah, of course they do. Roller coasters are on rails, and people love those. Yeah, they just want to go up. Players like knowing... Player agency is talked a lot about, but I think poorly understood. The players want to have fun. They showed up to play D&D, which means rolling dice and killing monsters. And players like knowing where the adventure is. Like, I like the sandbox as a player. I like the freedom to do what I want and be self-motivated. However, it is even in the most sandboxy campaigns I've played in, when we finally found the adventure, right? Or there might have been multiple adventures, and we ended up grabbing that thread and pulling on it, and now we were going to get on the roller coaster, and the GM would have the adventure behind. I always remember this. The GM would have the adventure behind the screen, and when we started picking up the thread and going down, and we were like, oh, is this the adventure? He would like and hold up the cover and be like, oh, and we'd point at it, and he would always show off the cover, because why not? Why not know the name and see the art and be like, oh, is that what we're doing? Is that what we're going to do? That was always a huge relief. Oh, thank God. Oh, we can relax now and just open doors and see what's next. Or, it wasn't, that's being very reductionist, but knowing that this is the adventure and we're on the adventure is a huge relief. So let players do it. Not everything should be on rails, obviously. There should be some back and forth, but you got to dial that into your players. And also, I think new players especially need rails. They need to know, because they have no idea what can be done. And then you slowly back off that stuff and you give them downtime. You ask them, once an adventure is over, you say, all right, well, now it's who knows when the next adventure will happen. You guys are back in the tavern, or you're back at town, or whatever, or you're here in your new castle. What do you want to do? Right? So then you start going back and forth between sandboxy stuff and more railroady stuff. Guten Tag. You said fantasy. Conkovar asks, I said the fantasy landscape is displaying the protagonist's mind. I think you're referring to a quote from Stephen R. Donaldson, one of my favorite writers, who talked about how in literature, now I can't remember the quote, but it has to do with, in fantasy, the fantasy world being an externalization of the player's of the readers, of the main character's psychological landscape. And of course, Stephen R. Donaldson would say that. Look at what he wrote. Does that translate into D&D? It does in some campaigns. There are definitely some campaigns where the plot, maybe not the world, but maybe the world, I mean, not Sarah, but yeah, what if it was Sarah? The world is... certainly there are D&D campaigns out there. There are dungeon masters out there who build their adventures to be a reflection of the characters in their game's internal conflict. I have done that, and you'll see some of that in the solo adventures that we're going to be running for the Chain of Akron, hopefully soon. But generally, I don't do that kind of stuff. Generally, that's not to my taste. I consider that like soap opera plotting, and I'm not a fan of soap operas. Not really. In some cases, I am. Chris Claremont X-Men, basically soap opera, and I love that. Any advice on attracting a plurality of voices to the hobby? I don't want somebody to think... If your D&D group that is your friends are just a bunch of... is just a bunch of generic white people, that's not a problem to solve. They're your friends. You might live in Iceland and there just aren't anybody else around. So the question is, I think, like, the question is, when you look around work, when you look around your school, when you look around your neighborhood, and there are the folks you hang out with, who are you inviting to play D&D? In general, I don't think I've seen a lot of that kind of exclusive attitude. I think that generally people, if there are... whoever the people around them are, those are the people they're going to invite to the table. And maybe I'm just optimistic. When I talk about trying to get different voices and get more diversity in the here at MCDM, it's because we're a company with a product, right? That's a very different thing than my group of friends playing D&D. Like, who, to a certain extent, who I play D&D with is none of anybody's business. They're my friends, right? So yeah, I wouldn't beat yourself up too much if you look around your D&D table and everybody there looks like you, unless in the back of your head you're like, why did I invite this other person that I hang out with and I quite like? Is it because they're different than me? Uh-oh. Because that might mean you're an asshole. Adam Ells, thank you for the Canadian dollars. Are there magazines this is almost like a message from the past. Although I guess in a certain sense, all messages are messages from the past. Try to be a fantasy writer, submitting stories to magazines. What magazines? They must be online magazines. Nick Nom, I am doing great. I'm not sick as far as I know. Knock on wood. So. Let's see if there's anything I've missed. Do I expect Pat I, who's $10 I thank for, but whose message I missed? Thank you for the question. Do I expect a follow-up on the one-on-one video after? Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah. Well, actually, so we did a video on running D&D one-on-one, which I put off for a long time because I was just waiting to do it. I was waiting to run a one-on-one session, and I realized, well, at this rate, I don't know how long it's going to take, and I already have a lot to say. But yeah, what I imagine I'll do is we'll run the Boots adventure, which we already did. We did a Twitch stream where I asked Twitch for help with the adventure because I was kind of stuck. There was a plot point, there was a detail that I needed to work out, and I just couldn't come up with something, and Twitch helped out magnificently. Bad cat. No, I'm distracted. I distracted myself. Oh, so I think what'll probably happen is I'll run the Boots adventure, and then we'll do a running the game video that is me taking something that I learned from that adventure, and trying to turn it into a universal lesson. I don't think that'll be hard. Whether it's literally just a second video on one-on-one, I don't necessarily think it'll need to be that. Kelly Who says, could the adventure lookup have a DM note repository? I don't think it would need that, Kelly Who, because I very much doubt that players. There's not an earthquake. There's a tiny cat. What? Has the accoutrement on my table blocked your passage, and now you're having a hard time figuring out how to get to me? Other cat, hello. Come on. Meows. Meow. Hello, other cat. Meows. Why are you mowing? Why are you mowing? Why? Why? You came here for pettings. You don't like being picked up. Meow. Hello. Hi. Yes. This is what you want. You want to sit here, sit in the lap, on the leg, and get pettings. Ooh, I love you. I love you. The hell are we talking about? Oh, yeah. Kelly Hugh, I very much doubt that players are just scrubbing through adventure lookup. It's a DM tool. I think the only time anyone's ever going to go there is if they're a dungeon master. Tiny Cat thinks Tiny Cat is tiny. What helped me get into cycling? I just love cycling. I just loved it. I've always loved riding a bike. So it's a huge... It's great for me physically, but it's also great for me mentally. What helped get me into cycling? Any tips? Buy a bike. Have I learned bike maintenance? I make sure my tires, every time I go out, I check the tires. Apart from that, no. Yeah. Matthew Felty says, I love to incorporate galactic horror into my games. What are some of my favorite genres that bleed into my D&D games? Spy stuff. I sort of wear my heart on my sleeve when it comes to that. Like Lord Latimer is, Lord Latimer is, and all that. Capital is kind of an expression of my love of political intrigue and spy fiction. So that's probably number one on my list of stuff that I love. Do I have anything on the updated warfare rules I can share? Well, we can talk about it. Did the bow mount work for your bike? Well, what I've got is I've got a cargo rack for the back of my bike coming, and the bow is in a case, and I'm just going to try and bungee cord it to that. It should work. I don't see why it wouldn't. Sorry. I don't know why. Petting cat. Petting cat means suddenly hair everywhere in my nose. What do I think about pre-made settings? I love them, King Gurk. I love pre-made settings because they save you a lot of time. The only issue is you have to find one you fall in love with. If you find it, I've got a whole series that I wanted to do, and I'm still going to do it, but I think I have a better idea for it now. I spent a lot of money buying up all these old D&D settings, and some of them are kind of like a generic medieval fantasy setting made by companies other than TSR, but everybody who used them, it was understood, used it for D&D. And I wanted to do a tour of these. I wanted to do a video on each of these. However, that is very backward looking. The idea of, and I know a lot of my fans would love to see this. They would love to see me talk about these old, especially obscure settings that they do not wot of. And I do think there's a lot of value there because those settings are done. You can go spend, not a lot of money and go on either on eBay and get old physical copies for, $15 a pop, or go to if I shake in the right way, hopefully I'll be able to counterbalance that and everything will look normal. Or you go to this is quite a pleasant live stream, isn't it? I'm having a good time. I hope you folks are having a good time. Or you can go to Drive-Thru RPG or any of the One Bookshelf things and get a lot of these old settings in PDF. If you fall in love with one of these old settings, you'll be the only person at your table that's ever even heard of it, right? And that'll make it your world. Like I fell in love with the D&D setting in the 90s, and it was because I loved it. It was mine. It was mine. It was it was in my heart. I can't think of any other way to say it. If you don't get to that state, then it's just going to feel like work, and you're not going to enjoy it. But if you fall in love with somebody else's setting, then it becomes yours. Indeed. I agree. But I do think that series would be incredibly backward looking, right? By definition. And I am no longer as crazy in love with Matt Colville, the holder of tradition. Matt Colville, the let's only ever talk about old D&D nonsense. So what I think I'm probably going to do is I'll make that series and I'll make those videos, but every other video will be about some new modern game. In fact, I think I might start with Mothership. And the problem is you just got to bite the bullet. I haven't played Mothership, so I'm going to be making a video about an RPG I've never played. But as long as I present it right and I say, look, I've never played this, but you might like it. Let's talk about what's inside it and let's talk about what's cool about it. Here's another game. To me, there's a much larger problem happening in the hobby right now because of live streaming, because of the 5th edition and its success, because of shows like Stranger Things. There's been a huge influx of, I think, millions of people into the hobby over the past 5 years. 5-6 years. And a lot of them, I see this on Twitter too. I see people talking about how, hey, don't try to tell me how to play D&D. If I want to run a character that makes literally no sense and that is super unoptimized and that isn't really interested in combat and all this other stuff, that's my prerogative. It's like, well, of course it is. It's an RPG. Of course it is. There's, you can make whatever character you want. However, it sounds like you'd rather be playing a different game. It sounds like you would rather be playing a different game. There are a lot of people out there, I think, who they don't realize that the thing they love is making fantasy characters, making certain kinds of fantasy characters, a certain kind of fantasy drama, maybe even a certain kind of soap opera in a fantasy world idea, none of which has anything to do with armor class and magic missile and proficiency modifiers. Why are you playing D&D? Because they don't know any better. It's the only example they have. And this has been a problem with D&D for 40 years. But I am from a time we call the 90s, where if you went to Gen Con, no one cared about D&D. A tiny little over there in the back. And there was this huge, robust tabletop RPG industry with lots of games that could support lots of products. And I sort of would like to go back to that because I think it's healthier. I think that there are a lot of players out there who they don't realize, they don't know this because they only have one example. Remember, a man with a watch knows the time, a man with 2 watches, never sure. But if they had other examples in other games, they could be like, oh wow, that seems like I should be playing Delta Green. But that's maybe not. Yeah. I should be playing with the Galactic Horror. I mean, I should be playing Delta Green. I should be playing this. I should be playing that, and talk about other games. And then once I've done that, once I've said, okay, let me promote something new, it's exciting, that I would like to play, that I think is cool, and talk about it. Now I'll go back and talk about some old thing, Harn. Here, let's look at Harn World. And now let's talk about this new game. And then I can have my cake and eat it too. I can do the stuff I want to do that is quirky and personal and idiosyncratic, all these old settings that I love. And I can do the stuff that I think is important, that excites me because it's forward-looking. And that's talking about new games. So hopefully that makes sense. Any tips for how to make a good aligned necromancer? Ninja Bunny, I guess, thank you for the donation. I think I'm basically opposed to that idea. I think I agree with the premise of D&D that the act of raising the dead is an inherently evil act. And I'm not saying that the fact that I think that way doesn't mean you should think that way. But I'm not going to lie to you and come up with some, fake answer just to appease, just to answer the question. If somebody wants to play a necromancer, let them play an evil character. I did a whole video on that. Evil characters can be really cool and fun. In fact, I have played many evil characters in the games I've run, and I've never had a problem with it or the group. Except once, and that wasn't my fault. What do I think about players suggesting to the DM what happens to them after an interaction? Nordic Nugs, thank you for the donation. What do I think about players suggesting to the DM what happens to them after an interaction? Like suggesting that now they have a curse or an illness or of some sort after. I think that's great. I think that the DM should always be listening. Right? The DM should always be listening to the players. And I remember, when the Revenant Vow, when somebody fell off the raft in the swamp trying to get to the temple of Explicitica Defilis, my friend Tom, not Tom, said, oh, I hope there's no leeches in the water. And I went, that's a good idea, Tom. And they're like, Tom, shut up! And now there were leeches in the water. Right, so that's very, very simple. That's not exactly what you're talking about, but I love that idea. I remember when I played on the Stream of Annihilation a million years ago, didn't I do something where I deliberately failed a roll, or I made a roll to see if I could stop myself, to have self-control doing something? I like the idea of the player's contribution to the game not exclusively being in deciding what their character does, but in also placing their own limits on the things that their character does. And kind of being a co-creator of what's going on. The problem is some players just have really bad taste. And the stuff they're going to want to come up with, like a good friend of mine who I really, really like, and I would probably like to play D&D with again, would say stuff while I was the dungeon master and they're exploring a cave, and he would say, we shouldn't go in here, folks. What if there are pockets of gas built up in the cave and our torches light it off and there's an explosion? And everyone else is like, what are you talking about? You just made that up. Don't make life harder for us. And that's an example of how he was trying to be dramatic, and he was trying to come up with how to increase the difficulty level and do so in a creative way. But I felt like he was really stymieing play, coming up with these crazy scenarios that didn't have anything to do with what was on the page. And I wasn't inclined to then go, yeah. No, I was like, oh, don't worry about that stuff. So it could be a double-edged sword. D&D tells all the stories I want. That's not what I said. What I said is I can do anything I want story-wise inside D&D, because I don't think that. I mean, you've seen Capital, right? There's all sorts of, like. In fact, one of the reasons I'm really happy with that we streamed the Chain of Acheron, in spite of how much stress it brings me and how miserable it makes me sometimes. The streaming of it, not the running of it. I love running it. When I'm behind the screen, I don't even think about the cameras or the audience generally. Is that especially the first 6 episodes, where we started in the middle of the action, where we had conspiracies between the players, not all of them. When the commander died, only Lars and Phil knew what was going on. The rest of the players were like, what is going on? Right? I love that. Suddenly they've got to get on a boat. The boat there was a skill challenge to escape the fall of the city. Every one of these things, people in chat were like, I have never seen anything like this before. I didn't know you could do that. People in chat were like, he he just ripped off a Star Trek episode. This is the plot of a Star Trek episode. And their brains start to fizz because they had never seen anybody do that before. Take a piece of fiction that they knew and translate it into D&D and put it in front of players who've never seen that episode. They end up going from one world to another in the first 6 episodes, right? Because they're the Chain of Akron, they've been around. They're all of a sudden, they're going from one universe to another universe, trying to desperately escape Ajax. Well, a lot of these things are not what people generally associate with D&D, either in terms of tone or pacing or game mechanics like skill challenges and stuff like that, or something from an earlier edition that a lot of modern players don't know about. And I feel like if I want to do a spy story or a romance or a tragedy, I can do all those in D&D, can't I? That was the point. Now I talk about other games. Sure, yeah. What game am I most interested in? I've talked about this before. I'd really like to play Numenera. I'd really like to play not necessarily Star Wars, but I would really like to play a game again using the Warhammer, the drama dice from Fantasy Grounds. I really like those drama dice. I don't know if they would translate well into a game like D&D. I'd like to play Mothership. I'd like to play Fall of Delta Green. I'm trying to think of other games. Generally speaking, it's like, for me, I'm kind of old school. I go to Gen Con, I look around, I'm like, oh, this looks cool, this looks cool. I don't have my finger on the pulse of independent creators right now the way I used to. Hello, Ryan, thank you for the donation. About to launch the West Marches campaign. Any updates or new lessons? I'm trying to think of, there are a lot of videos we've done where afterwards people took the wrong lessons from them. Or it's often the case that I'm like, hey, here's something you can do, and people think that's the way we're supposed to do it. I'm like, no, wait a minute. The fact that I do it that way, I don't even do it that way anymore. So I'm trying to think back to the West Marches game. I definitely seem to remember there being people who, I think that the persistent myth surrounding that video I did was that you need a lot of players, that you need more players than a normal game. That West Marches play is 4. I know 12 people that want to play. No, that's not true. You can definitely do West Marches game with 4 players or 6 players or 3 players. What kind of bike do I ride? I've got a Co-op City 1.2. Ever play Blades in the Dark? No. I don't have good night vision, so I need light. I'll play Blades. I'll play Blades in the sun. No, Ascalad, because I don't know anything about it. Do I have any thoughts on the Numenera conversion to 5th edition? No, I don't really know anything about it. I like the stuff. I like Monty Cook games, and I like the stuff they put out. Is it backwards looking? No, Numenera is pretty forward looking, I think. It's definitely by definition, very forward looking. Very forward looking. In fact, it might be too forward looking in some cases, but I don't know. No, I know nothing about them, Evan. But Evan Nyquist, I've never heard of them, but thank you very much for the donation. Joseph, I remember you from the earlier donation. What's my opinion on Dark Sun? I love Dark Sun. It's not based on Dune. It's not based on Dune. It's based on Dune is not a dying Earth fantasy. Dark Sun is a dying Earth fantasy. I guess it's a desert planet, but it's not. It doesn't have anything in common with any of the. It's not a desert planet for the same reasons. It's like, Covenant has a ring, but for very different reasons than Frodo has a ring. They are not related. So yeah, I love Dune. I love Dark Sun. They don't have anything in common. Dark Sun much more in common with something like Thundar the Barbarian. I think. Love Dark Sun. Do I have any advice on separating D&D characters from their inspiration? Magma Toad, thank you for the donation. All my characters end up too complex to play or just derivative. Well, go read like comic books or something. It's very common. Like Anna, I shouldn't have said a name. I should have said somebody, but now I've outed her. The first time I played D&D with Anna, she showed up with a barbarian character and 2 pages of single-spaced type quirks and flaws, and she just sat there and read them all to me. Literally 2 pages. There must have been 100 of them. She found a website where you could go and generate random quirks and flaws for your character, and she just kept doing it and didn't stop. And I thought, I did not know this person. I did not know Anna. We had been working together, but not closely. And I thought, is she trolling me? And of course, she was trying to bake 50 years of playing D&D into one session, right? She wanted to get as much out of it as possible. And as it turned out, none of that stuff had any bearing on the character that she played. The fantasy she had of what she was going to be doing collapsed as soon as she was actually playing and making decisions about this character. So it turned out that wasn't an issue. But, you know, try to focus on just one character trait. Or try this, Magma Toad. Try coming up with a character where I like this race and class combination, this class and ancestry combination. And I like my character's abilities, and I maybe have an idea what they look like, but I don't know anything else about them. I don't know anything else about them. I don't know where they're from. I don't know what their motivation is. I know what their name is. I know maybe you know what their alignment is, but maybe not. And play D&D without knowing any of that stuff. And decide what your character's backstory is based on the things that happen in the game, based on your inspiration. And if that takes a little bit of discipline, because you don't want to do that. You want to develop this. You want to build 50 years of playing D&D into one character. Maybe you think that that having a multi-layered character is the same as having a good character, but I hope I've dispelled that notion with the role-playing video. Like, some of the best movie characters of all time are incredibly one-dimensional characters, and there's nothing wrong with that. So it takes a little bit of discipline to say, I'm not gonna la 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 la. I'm not gonna listen to my backstory. I don't know what you are yet. I'm just gonna play and see what happens, and see who we meet and what challenges we come up with, and I'm going to choose what my backstory is from that stuff. I don't know, but I think that would help. Daniel Morton loves my videos. Well, I love yours, Daniel. How do you feel about running a human-only campaign in D&D? I think I should have done that with the Chain of Acheron. I like the idea. I think I should have done that with the Chain of Acheron. Yeah. Running in a human-only D&D setting, is that too restrictive? No, not at all. It's your game. I don't think there's any such thing as too restrictive. You know, I think you could run. I think you could decide, as long as your players are like, that sounds fine. Yeah, sure. You know, like Phil wanted to run a game that was literally all dwarves, and when Justin Sherry wanted to play, he said, "All right, but you got to play a dwarf, Justin." And Justin's like, "That's fine," and he did a great job. He played a fucking crazy ass barbarian dwarf that I love. As long as your players are bought into it, you could say we're all dwarves. They might be giants, but we're certainly dwarves. And so yeah, I definitely think a human-only campaign setting work. That's kind of what Gary Gygax was trying to do back in the day. People don't realize this, but or I should say nowadays, this is now obscure, but it used to be if you wanted to play any character other than human, there was a limit to how high a level you could be. You could, if you were an elf, you could only get to 6th level. And it didn't make any sense at all. There was no in-universe way to justify this. The only way to understand it was Gary thought that elves are part of the past in the world, like Tolkien, right? Dwarves are this is the age of men. This is humans are rising up. So these empires are old and dying. That's the reason there are all these awesome magic items buried in the earth, and we don't stay home and make +5 swords. We don't know how, right? That knowledge is lost. We got to go explore for it. This is a very kind of pre-colonial, medieval attitude toward the past, which nowadays is very alien to us. The idea that the past was a higher tech than we are now, that is not something anybody sane thinks anymore. But that idea of rooting around in the ruins of these much greater empires than the ones we have now are built into the bones of D&D, still is. And those societies in fantasy land, that's not the Roman Empire, giants must have built this, is what actual medieval people thought when they looked around and saw some of the Roman architecture. Or even pre-Roman, like there's Greek. I think in the Anabasis, the 10,000 Greeks, I think it was Xenophon or one of Xenophon's lieutenants, writes about how the Cyrus the Great's works were now in ruin and were perceived as being like made by aliens or something. They were so massive and so much more ambitious than anything anybody could make at that time. So, you know, for thousands of years, people existed believing that the past was better. That's why they call them the Dark Ages, by the way. They don't call them that anymore. Well, in a fantasy world, it's these other ancestries, elves and dwarves and stuff, that made all that stuff. And it's humans who are the new folks and digging around in the rubble. So how do you, but what Gary noticed, and I've noticed this, you've probably noticed this, is that everybody wants, no, you already play a human every day, whether you like it or not. So when you see all these other options, you're like, ooh. Some players aren't like that. I remember playing a game I quite liked called Blue Planet, which was really cool. It's basically Dune on a water world. And I played a uplifted orca. And my friend Mark was like, that's stupid. That's ridiculous. And I'm like, how is it any stupider than playing a dwarf or an elf? But I liked the idea, I always have, that elves and dwarves are like alien races, right? Especially elves. Dwarves in my setting are basically short Klingons, right? So to me, playing a uplifted orca, no different. Same. So Gary, in a quest to stop players from just never playing humans, and in his desire to make a world that was about humans digging around in the wreckage of these old dead empires, which that's still true, we still do that, he put level caps on non-human races. That worked. People played humans because they wanted to get beyond 6th level, but the result was most parties were mostly human. And that's what Gary wanted. So I don't think that's great design, but it produced the effect he wanted. Any advice on Storm King's Thunder, Kevin? Bonjour? No, I've never run. I have not. Andrew Wonder, I have not read The Piety Mechanic. Hopefully, I would go ask them, what did they think of concordances? Was there anything that they thought, oh, we should use this? What's my opinion on comic relief characters? Nothing wrong with that. Wasn't Scanlan from Critical Role basically that? Super useful. Hunter, thank you for the donation. I think that in D&D, the premise of D&D is that necromancy is evil, and that makes sense to me in that context. We don't have necromancy here in the real world, so I can't really answer it in the real world. Preparing to run Night Below, any quick advice? Yes, Hosky, it's a great adventure. However, you got to be careful because the more time you spend in the above lands, in the mundane world, the more the players are going to think going into the Underdark is a distraction. So get them down there as quick as possible. Jean-Philippe says, hey Matt, Brazilian fan, bom dia. Just got here at the stream wondering, will there ever be a continuation to the 2001 review? Yes. Watch the Shape of Water video next week. And that is the template for the 2001 video. The 2001 video is going to start with me saying, what is 2001 about? And that's going to be the video. Any advice on running a Bronze Age setting? Isn't that the new thing from I almost said TSR. Isn't that the new thing from Wizards of the Coast? With that in mind, do I think a different system would be better for the chain? No. 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 Where is my mullet? I do not have a mullet. People don't know what a mullet is. People watched that last video and they saw this and they thought it's a mullet. No, mullets are a haircut for one thing. A mullet is a haircut, and it's one where you have cut your hair short up front, like often literally like a crew cut, or it's like spiky, and you have it long in the back. And this is not really that long for one thing. So just having long hair and combing it back is not a mullet. But it's not the 80s anymore. People don't know that. The people talking about mullets are not native to that. Alex says, hey Matt, where have you been? Well, you're obviously not on Twitch, because we stream on Twitch several times a week. And we do once a week I try to make sure that we do a stakeholders meeting where we don't talk about, we don't play games, we just sit and talk about what MCDM is working on. What did I think about the Diablo RPG? I didn't think anything about it. I literally didn't think about it. Didn't play it, didn't read it, didn't open it up, didn't buy it. Have you ever played 13th Age? No, but I know it's designed by a lot of the 4th edition designers. Jonathan Tweet was one of them. And somebody else whose name is right on the tip of my tongue. I would probably check out 13th Age. Matt, thank you for the donation. Do I think that because humans had such a big focus, this caused the reverse where everyone runs exotic? No, I think that you writing this and you watching this are already a human. So even if you knew nothing about any of these assumptions, when you open up the player's handbook and you see these other ancestries, you're like, that looks cool, I want to be one of them. That's it. What? Well, I don't agree. Link Z says, hey, you're amazing. No, you're amazing. let's see, what's the timeline for the return of the chain? Well, let's see. We know a lot more about this disease now than we used to, so we're getting better outcomes. They intubate people a lot less now than they used to, so that's one of the reasons the infected fatality rate is dropping. It was originally labeled as an infectious disease, as a respiratory disease, and in fact, people who die from COVID-19 often die from acute respiratory failure. But now I think we understand more about how COVID-19 affects the production of angiotensin and how it affects your ACE receptors and results in a lot of free radicals, a lot of oxygen, O2, just floating around, basically inadvertently attacking the endothelial cells of your veins and arteries, and that results in production of von Willebrand's factor, quite a lot of it, and that causes your blood to clot. That's why people's organs fail. That's why people's blood turns to molasses. That's why they have problems breathing. And they were learning that, even though people were dying of acute respiratory failure, the lungs were still doing the job of oxygenating the blood. So what is going on? So that's why now there's a steroid that helps, and so there are better treatments. So that's, knowing that is useful. It gives us a lot of power, means fewer people die. There's also blood plasma treatments that we know or we believe would work, but that nobody is pursuing because everybody seems to think that if you're going to spend the time and the money on prevention, that a vaccine is the best way to do it. So even though there are treatments that we think that virologists and epidemiologists believe would work, we're not looking into them, which is interesting. And obviously everybody's talking about vaccine production. And Britain thinks it's going to have a vaccine in September. India said it was going to be deploying its vaccine in August, which seems insane to me. Even September seems insane. But if there's a vaccine in September and people are getting it, and it's, 4 or 6 months later, and people aren't, going blind, which has happened, we have in the past produced unsafe vaccines because they were rushed. Because the established infrastructure that prevents this had been politicized, right? The current administration didn't invent politicizing the CDC. It's been politicized in the past, and so there are a lot of people who are kind of we shouldn't be skipping phase 3 trials. We shouldn't be, there's a big difference between using experimental treatments on someone who's already sick and deploying an untested vaccine to a healthy population. You were fine before we gave you this vaccine. And I think it was swine flu that one of the side effects was people went blind. And, it doesn't have to be a lot of people. What if only 1% of people who get this vaccine go blind? That's still a shitload of people we're talking about. So I think it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle of 2021 before I would feel safe taking a vaccine, because I would want to see that it had been tested and proven. And I think that's probably true for everybody else. So when is the chain going to return? Probably in the middle of 2021. That's my guess for when it will be safe. When will all of these players feel safe, all physically being in the same place? Probably when we have a vaccine. I can't imagine it happening before that. Not a question, Joshua. Thanking me for the content. Well, I thank you for being here. That makes me very happy, Josh. Thank you for the donation. And I'm glad that the content we made had some effect. Do I have any such? Ashley asks, thank you for the £5. 5 euros, I apologize. Do I have any suggestion for a post-apocalyptic sci-fi? As in the rebuilding phase rather than the survival phase. No, I'm not. That's not my genre. That's more of a Jason Hasenauer question. If he were here, which he's not, then he could answer that. Isn't some Mad Max happening after the collapse and now it's kind of... no, not really. I only know everything just fell apart, and I know... or it's now 1,000 years later. The in-between part, I'm not a huge... That's not my genre. What the wicked person? You asked a question that is so baffling to me I cannot parse it. What does Smurfs have to do with D&D? I have to build a red dragonborn city. Any ideas? Your ideas? If I did, your ideas would be better because they'd be yours. What am I doing to relax? I cycle every day. At least 20 miles. Do I run all my campaigns in the same world/universe? Leonardo, I run the game that I'm interested in running. And because I have my own D&D setting that I've spent 30 years developing, I tend to run in that setting, and I tend to... I enjoy being inspired by what happened in the last game, but if I wanted to do something else, I would. Do I know of any good noir RPGs? Night's Black Agents? I think Night's Black Agents is something we'll probably check out in a video at some point soon. I feel like we've been streaming now for an hour, and I feel like this has been good. I think now might be a good time to stop. Could you have called your video "The Origin of Executive Power in Chaotic Societies"? Absolutely. I could have called it "How to Make a Realistic Looking Kermit the Frog Model," but that would not have been accurate, nor would your suggestion. Because if you watch the video, you find out why it's not called that. Meow. Could an Evolve role-playing game ever happen? No. No, it could not. But what is there in that game that you couldn't just rip off and do on your own? Nothing. If I sent you a copy, if you sent me, thank you for the donation, if you sent me a copy of a game, would I review it? No. No. We avoid any kind of we avoid anything like that. Because I want folks to know that if I talk about something, it's because I found it organically, authentically, and it represents my interests and my attitudes, not what someone held up in front of me and said, "Hey, look at this! Hey, look at this! Hey, look at this!" No. Yo, are there warfare changes in the Kingdom? Huge warfare changes. In fact, we'll talk about that before we stop. While you played and developed your setting, did I have to retcon anything? Leventhros, hey Leventhros, $5. Thank you for the donation. Yeah, are you kidding? Every time there's a new version of D&D, I completely rework my setting so that my setting makes sense with this new version. Like there weren't Dragonborn in the 90s. So my world didn't have Dragonborn in it. And I also had a huge, when 3rd edition came along, 3rd edition was open, and I was working for companies that made third-party D&D products, and I realized if I wanted to, I could turn this D&D setting into a product. So I better change it into something that is less idiosyncratic and more commercial. And that's the version of it that, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening. Hang on a minute. So yes, I revise my setting, I retcon my setting all the time. Breathing Nerddom ran a one-shot. That was my friend Jim Murphy's idea, by the way. Ran a one-shot and used the Medusa suggestion, so that was super cool. Props, credit where it's due. Thank you for the donation. Zachary Gallagher, that sounds like your inspiration. That sounds super cool to me, but that sounds like something that you think is cool, and therefore, if you did it, it would be better than anything I would come up with. I'm trying to create a setting without ancestral cultures and languages. You mean like without a past? Like Clan of the Cave Bear stuff? Maybe go check out like Neanderthal fiction, of which there is some. Quest for Fire? Wasn't there some kind of like preponderance of Neanderthal fantasy fiction in the 80s? I seem to remember. Joshua Goodwin, thank you for the donation. Any tips for insanity in D&D? Aren't there optional rules for insanity in aren't there optional rules for insanity in the Dungeon Master's Guide? People don't read the DM's Guide, and thank God, because if they did, my YouTube channel wouldn't exist. But I would definitely check that out. Any updates on Fighter? I did a little work on Fighter just over the past 3 days. Kind of trying to make sure that it delivers on the promise of the title. And I'm still optimistic that that book could get done in the next 6 months. Yes, OZ Hobo, thank you for the donation, $5. Love listening to me talk about movies. Well, we're going to do a video that is literally just a movie video about The Shape of Water. Shape of Water, I quite liked and had a lot to. I thought there was a lot going on in it, and so in less than a week, you're going to get another video, and I'm not in the video. You do not see my face. It's just me narrating over Shape of Water. So, so let's talk for a second about Kingdoms and Warfare, and then we'll stop. And those of you who are like, oh, come by Twitch. We stream 2 or 3 times a week on Twitch, and it's mostly this. That's it. So occasionally we play games. I'm sure we'll do some more Star Citizen streaming when 3.10 finally drops. And I'm super looking forward to that, but I'm also looking forward to it coming out of getting tested, because there's some crazy bugs in it right now that I do not want to have to deal with. Is Shape of Water a YouTube video? It will be. It will be in probably Wednesday, I think. I would watch The Shape of Water. Exoscale, go watch The Shape of Water now. Is Star Citizen any good? Star Citizen is amazing. It is, I mean, in the genuine, like, oh, what? Oh, look at that. No game is like, there's no game out there like Star Citizen, including Star Citizen, because it's not a game. It is 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 not a commercial product. It is an in-development alpha. And I happen to be one of the very few people in the world who has actually brought a game to market using the engine they're using. They're using a heavily modified version of it. However, every version of it is heavily modified because you have to modify that damn thing. And so when my friends and I play Star Citizen, I think our attitude is slightly different than a normal person's would be, because we're like, oh yeah, I remember this bug. This has never gone away. And so we're all professional game developers, and we actually worked in CryEngine and shipped a game with it. So we have a kind of a different attitude toward it. Star Citizen is not a game, but for an alpha, if you want to see a game being developed from the inside and you don't mind lots of crazy bugs, it's pretty awe-inspiring. Like, incredibly jaded people I know became converts and were like, I want to quit my job and just spend time in this game. Anyway, so hang on a minute. Oh wow, we've been doing a lot of talking and not a lot of drinking. So Kingdoms and Warfare. Somebody was asking about Warfare. I just want to give you folks an update as to where we are. Kingdoms. So imagine the book is split into 2 parts. Kingdoms. And there are 2 things you need to know about Kingdoms and Warfare. 1. Hail Hydrate. That's funny. That is funny. Yeah, that screenshot is... Mwah, that screenshot's beautiful. Like... Do you have to pay for alpha? Yeah, you got to give them money. Yes, Ryan. I think the minimum buy-in is $45, and you get a ship. Yes, that's how they fund development. Hi there. I'd like to talk to you about ducts. So nobody asked about this, but we're going to cover it anyway. And that is, or maybe somebody asked about it, and I didn't see it. So the kingdoms half is a kingdom is one type of domain, right? You can imagine lots of different types of domains that don't have anything to do with kings or dukes or barons. For instance, a thieves guild or a church or an order of monks or a wizard's order or a bunch of, there's dozens of different, literally I think we're going to have like between 20 and 30 different types of player organizations, of which one is a noble court. So you can imagine our noble court starting off small and we're just a barony. But then if we level up, we could eventually become a kingdom. So that's the kingdoms half of Kingdoms and Warfare. And the organization that you and the other players run and are part of grants you access to what are called powers, domain powers. And each organization only has a couple of them, like 2, I think, maybe 3, but normally I think it's like 2. For instance, if you play a spy network, which is one subclass of an underworld syndicate. So our type, this is kind of like class and subclass. We're an underworld syndicate, and we get bonuses and stats based on being an underworld syndicate, but our specialty is we are a spy network. Oh, this is fucking cool already. It's cool already. One of the abilities a spy network gets is Traitor, where you have an ability where you can choose an enemy lieutenant, and we define what counts as a lieutenant. So this doesn't work on the big bad boss, because that would be game breaking, but you choose one of the lieutenants in the boss battle. This only works in boss battles, although what only works means you could maybe use this outside of a boss battle, but then you'd be foregoing the ability to use it in the boss battle. You could point to one of the boss's lieutenants and say, you were secretly an our employee the entire time. Right? If you're an Assassin's Guild, you can assassinate somebody. And the way you do that, the way these mechanics work is they use a pool of dice. Every character in the organization is what's called an officer. We are the officers of this organization. So you can imagine there are NPCs that we might know, and that might even come on an adventure with us, but they're not officers, so they don't get to use these things. Only we get to use these. Or it's up to the play. You could promote that NPC and make them an officer. That would be up to the dungeon master. I think it's a very flexible system. Every officer has I don't have any dice here. Isn't that crazy? This is probably the longest I've lived, the farthest away from any dice. They're all at work. Every officer has a die that is their power die. And it starts off a D4. Some of these abilities are incredibly powerful, and so small dice are still going to be really useful. It's a D4, and it's and in the final battle with the boss, with the villain of the adventure that you're in the middle of. And this system I think is going to be robust enough and flexible enough that even if you're in the middle of an existing adventure, you can start using it. You don't have to go build a custom adventure just to use this system. Nope, if you're running Storm King's Thunder or Red Hand of Doom or Night Below or whatever, the DM will be able to pretty easily identify who is the boss of this adventure, and these rules will work. In the boss fight, you take your power die and you roll it and you put the result in a pool of dice. So we all roll our dice and we all put the results in the pool. And then over the course of the battle, on our turns, we decide how we're going to use those dice. I could take 3 or 4, all the dice out of the pool. Well, wait a minute. Don't do that. Don't take all the dice out of the pool. I need those dice because I'm going to use the special ability. And some special abilities are take a die out. Some special abilities are take, all the dice out or whatever. And now, so abilities like Traitor, abilities like Assassinate, some of these super dramatic and game-changing abilities, which the bad guys also have their own unique versions of, by the way. Lord Saxton is a despotic warlord. That's one of the enemy realms, and he has its own cool abilities that he can use. These abilities require you to start behaving like a team, which not everyone's going to like, right? Some people are just going to want to be grabastic pieces of amphibious shit. And that's also part of the fun of this. And in fact, there's a whole group of domain. There's a domain that is just an adventuring company, and it's got its own subtypes, including we're just a bunch of random idiots. We fight all the time. We hate each other. So whatever group you're already in the middle of, if you don't want to say, hey, let's all be druids, or even if you are playing a druid circle needs wizards and spies and all that stuff. So your thief can be an officer in a druid circle, no problem. These abilities don't reference any these domain powers don't reference any class abilities. So even if we're in an order of knights, I can just play a priest. I can play a cleric if I want to. I can play a thief. This order of knights could use a thief. We need spies and still get the benefit of these powers. So it's a maximally flexible, but also highly impactful system. And it's going to require you to start cooperating because of the nature of that pool of dice in a way that you might not have done before, and I quite like that. This is a marriage of style and mechanics. You have to be an organization, right? So, that part of the game is married to a mechanic called intrigue. Intrigue is basically combat between domains. And it's best to think of it as the prelude. An intrigue is a period of time, and it is the prelude to the final battle. I'm trying to think of like the Red. Who's a famous organization of bad guys from a D&D adventure that you folks already know? Bjorn, yes. who's a famous, the Zentarum, right? So the Zentarum. Let's imagine the bad guys of this adventure aren't the Zentarum from Zentil Keep? Am I remembering that right? The Red Wizards of Thay. I know those guys a little bit better. The Red Wizards of Thay. Let's imagine that the Scarlet Brother, that's Daniel Morton, Greyhawk. Oh, yeah. Azar Cool and the Red Hand of Doom is perfect, but I think that's more obscure. But like the Red Wizards of Thay. So the Red Wizards of Thay, let's imagine that the bad guy of this adventure was one of the Red Wizards of Thay. Right? So at some point in the adventure, we know about them. A lot of adventures, like Night Below is a great example of this. Even Red Hand of Doom, a lot of adventures, especially big epic ones, start off where you don't know who the bad guys are yet. You're just kind of dealing with these local problems, and maybe there's an agent of the bad. I love this stuff, by the way. So at this point, you're not in an intrigue yet. You're just playing D&D, and the Dungeon Master knows who the bad guys are, and the players are aware that at some point we're going to meet like the real bad guys of this. But then at some point you start to realize, holy moly, the Red Wizards of Thay are out there, and they're trying to take over the world or whatever. So you become aware of them, and that's when you start using your domain skills. Diplomacy, intrigue, lore, not intrigue, diplomacy, espionage, lore, and operations. Operations is kind of a generic catch-all category, but we give examples of how these things are used. You start saying, well, let's use some espionage and find out what's going on with the Red Wizards of the Thay. The DM might give you a warning if you did that. Let's have our organization, not us. We're busy going on adventures, but we're now in charge of an organization. That organization has agents. And those agents could be, depending on the organization, they could be blacksmiths or, they could be spies, they don't have to be. They could be peasants, they could be farmers. We could be a noble court and we're in charge of the barony, and that means all these people basically work for us and we're in charge of them and we're in charge of protecting them and defending them. So you start using your domain skills, and this also opens up this huge catalog of gameplay that's currently kind of missing from D&D, where your organization can be doing research for you, and not just research, accomplishing things, finding stuff out, acquiring things. While you're off adventuring, your organization says, okay, we're going to make a lore check to find out what's going on with this. But the Dungeon Master is like, well, the Dungeon Master will communicate this to you, and you will probably have these rules and you will have read them, and you'll know, hang on a minute. Is there a way for us to find out about the Red Wizards of Thay without directly targeting them? Do they have enemies? Let's go make a diplomacy check and talk to their enemies. The Dungeon Master would say, yeah, you can do that. And now that's not an intrigue. That is not an intrigue. That's just, we have an organization, we want to use our skills. That's fine. But as soon as you say, we're going to make an espionage check and try to figure out what the Red Wizards of Thay are trying to accomplish, now you've started an intrigue, because that is direct interaction between you and the Red Wizards of Thay. Right? And it's much like rolling initiative for a Dungeon Master, where the Dungeon Master needs to understand, now we're just talking, but you just said something that this person's not going to put up with. They're going to draw their sword. It's initiative. How do you know when it's initiative? Well, you got to it's a muscle you develop. Same thing with intrigue. So you and the Red Wizards of Thay, you're about to make, it might not be you, by the way. If you dick around enough, if you build a wall, a lore and diplomacy wall around these guys, where everywhere they turn, their enemies and allies are all talking about you, the DM might just decide they know what you're up to, and then they start the intrigue. But now the intrigue begins. And an intrigue is basically like poking and prodding. It's not direct conflict, that's a fight. It's poking and prodding these two organizations, feeling each other out and trying to sabotage each other. And an intrigue lasts from the point where the Dungeon Master called for it, or you might call for it. This is an intrigue. We're starting, let's make an espionage check, let's find out about these guys. To the final battle with the boss, whoever the boss is, whichever Red Wizard of Thay we're going to be fighting. That is an intrigue. And I don't know how long that lasts. That is up to the Dungeon Master, because every adventure is different. Even two groups running the same adventure could run them over different periods of time. It took us 3 days in-game. In-game, 3 days to get through this. It took us 2 weeks to get through this. Okay, but an intrigue is an abstract period of time. And over the course of the intrigue, your organization gets a certain number of actions it can take. That depends on how high a level you are. And they do the same thing, and you're going to be rolling initiative, and the initiative actually goes into a pool as well. You roll an initiative die, and you take the result and you put it in the pool. And now we all sit around, and the Dungeon Master decides how often do we take actions. We have a lot of advice for this, and I think it's good advice, and I think it's functional. All this has withstood quite a lot of play testing, by the way. This is the result of the testers saying, this is dumb, we don't like this, and what about this? And they're like, oh, that's really cool, we like that. So these two organizations are sniping at each other and trying to sabotage each other, and they're taking actions during the intrigue, and they're using their skills, and the actions are They are using your skills to target the enemy realm's defenses. And your defenses are your communications. We can disrupt their communications. They can disrupt ours. Their resolve, like how strongly do our people believe in our cause. And their resources, which could be money, but it could be any number of things. You can imagine like a druid circle isn't super concerned about money, but they are concerned about the land on which they live. Well, if we attack that, if we salt the earth, then we're attacking that druid circle's resources. These are the 3 defenses, and each one of those defenses has a value associated with it. There's got like an armor class. So your communications has a defense rating, but it also has a level, and it can go up and down, and you can raise it, and your enemy can lower it. And each one of these levels, each of these 3 defenses, communications, resolve, and resources, each level, apart from 0, the neutral level, has some game mechanical effect. This one affects your power dice. You get more or less of them. This one affects your skills during the intrigue, right? So each of you, you're like, we could spend our action buffing our communications. That's a good idea. Or we could attack Lord Saxton's resources. That's a good idea. And now we have to figure out who's gonna, anyway. So hopefully everything I just described, that's Kingdoms. We just described it, that's it. It's awesome. The number of different organizations you can play is gonna be super cool. The abilities you get are awesome. They require you to kind of work together, agree, talk about, discuss how we're going to use our powers. The powers are incredibly useful, but it's like, in order to recharge your power die, you have to go back to base and rest for a week. That's what I mean when I say you're probably only going to use it if you're doing the boss battle, because it takes so long to replenish. Enemies get these too. There's lots of different kinds of enemy realms. Imagine one of the enemy realms is going to be just a bunch of hags in the swamp, and it's not just 3 hags in a swamp, it's their entire organization, and they have their own unique abilities. So if we do a good job with this, the dungeon master is going to open this book up and go, oh man, I really want to run an adventure that stars these hags as the bad guys, because look at all the cool stuff their organization can do. Okay. So intrigues let you use your domain's skills to affect the enemy, or your traits, your communication, your defenses, your communication, resolve, and your resources, leading up to a final battle with the enemy boss. And if I've done a good job explaining this, if you're a dungeon master already running an adventure and you're in the middle of the adventure, you probably already know how this is going to work. You're like, oh yeah, well, my bad guy would be the head of this organization. And you haven't seen the list of them, but once you see the list, you're like, oh yeah, they're this one. So what powers do they get? Oh, these powers are cool. Oh, I can't wait to use this in the final battle, right? And the players are going to do the same thing. The players are going to be like, what kind of organization are we? Well, we're not going to start from scratch, so we're not going to be an order of knights. Maybe next campaign we'll all be an order of knights. We're an adventuring company, and here's a bunch of different options for adventuring companies. Let's be these guys, and now we get these cool powers. That's intrigue. Warfare. Excuse me. Imperturbable Dreamer. There are parts of the Kingdoms have. Actually, the only thing in this book so far that is specific to 5e is power dice. Power dice give you access to abilities that are explicitly 5th edition combat abilities. They use all the language of 5e. And that's a lot of design and a lot of work. Replacing that would not be easy, but you could do it. Especially if you're adapting it for something like Pathfinder. It would be incredibly easy to adapt to Pathfinder, I think. It would be very difficult to adapt to something like Delta Green, but you could probably do it. So, Warfare, some of you folks already know about because it was in Strongholds and Followers. This is a highly revised version of it, but not so revised that you wouldn't recognize it. You would definitely recognize a unit. A unit looks the same as it did before, except the math is a lot more rigorous now on how much units cost if you're buying them from scratch. And we changed some of the language, like I think size is just going to be a number. A size 1 unit has a d4 casualty die. That makes it much more easy for us in the rules to talk about size versus casualties. Right? Your size doesn't change. A size 3 unit is always a size 3 unit, even if it only has 1 casualty left remaining. And the big changes that you could use now, you could basically take what I'm about to tell you and go graft it onto those rules. Is in the original rules, you made an attack test. One unit attack. This unit attacks this unit. I wish I had unit cards in front of me. This unit attacks this unit. You make an attack test. If you pass the attack test, you make a power test against their toughness. If you pass that, you inflict a casualty. Very straightforward. No hit points. No rolling damage. No math. In terms of keeping a running total of something, which is what you want when you've got 6 of something you have to manage and you don't want to have to be doing math for all of them. But people did not like, in the playtest, people didn't like no hit points. But now that it's out in the wild, what people don't like is, they don't like, I made an attack test, I succeeded, but my attack roll hit, I hit, but my power test missed, so I did nothing. Fair enough. So one of the big changes we made that makes everything go faster and makes it so people like it more is you make an attack test versus their defense. If you're successful, you inflict 1 casualty, period. Then you move on to the power test. If that's successful, you inflict damage. And damage is either 1, 2, or 3. Almost all units are damage 1, by the way. It isn't until you get to super elite units or monstrous units, special units, that you see damage 2 and damage 3. So that's very rare. So, yeah. Also, morale, you make a morale test when you're diminished, which is half your casualty. If you're a D4 casualty die, you make a morale test when you hit 2 casualties, and you only do it once. That's it. You don't do it every time after that. If you heal up and go back down, you don't do it again. So morale is a little bit more straightforward. We refactored the math. We have now done, thanks to Lord Duroc, the king of the mods, he wrote a script that would run a battle of just infantry. As long as there are just infantry, then there are no real choices to make, or the choices are kind of arbitrary. So he ran a script that would allow us to run thousands and thousands of combats simulated. And that helped us really tweak the math. And then I built the battle between Lord Saxton and the players that's going to be in the book. This is the actual battle that's going to be in the book. And in this battle, there are cavalry and archers and infantry and levies and aerial units. And we've now run a couple of tests of that, actual real tests with players running it, and they report back that everything is working and it is fun. It's not obvious who's going to win. The point values seem to be balanced. Choices seem to matter. It does seem as though you can come from behind if you start losing, depending on the choices you make. But what we don't have yet is we don't have maneuvers or battle magic. So if you're just using Warfare at Home, I would just change it so that attack tests inflict a casualty. And there was something else I recommended. I don't remember what it was. If you're just doing this at home. Yeah, siege weapons are totally in there. Now we're into the realm of stuff I do not recommend you trying to do on your own until you've read these rules. But units get a number of attacks equal to their size. And this was a big fix for the action economy, to make it so that it isn't always better to just buy more small units. If you want to spend money on bigger units, or you want to upgrade your units, there is a good reason to do so. A size 2 unit gets 2 attacks. A size 3 unit gets 3 attacks. There are only up to size 5, and those are incredibly expensive. And they'll be very, very rare. And obviously, like, if I spend all my points on one size 5 unit and you bought 5 size 1 units, that's basically the same. Actually, it's not exactly the same, because I'm only going to be making 1 morale test. When I get diminished, you're going to be making a bunch, but there'll be maneuvers you'll have access to that I won't have access to. And now we have ranks. We have our front rank, our center, and our rear rank. There's now positioning. Front rank, center, rear. And not all units belong to a rank. Your cavalry units and your aerial units do not belong to a rank. Only your ground units, your infantry and your archers belong to a rank. And now we're getting into the reads of stuff that's actually hard to explain without an illustration, which I don't have in front of me, but the book will definitely have illustrations. But essentially, units in your front are within range of enemy infantry in their front. That should make sense, right? Their infantry are any units I put in my front are within range of their enemy infantry. And the reason we use ranks is because we're trying to simulate that idea of the infantry protecting the archers. So ranks have size. And the size of a rank is equal to all the current casualty levels of the units in it. And as long as your front rank is physically larger, meaning the sum of all the casualty dice in it, as long as that number is greater than the sum of all the casualty dice in your center, then your front protects your center because it's literally bigger. But once it's smaller than your center, it collapses. That's a mechanical term. It's going to cause morale checks. It's also going to have some impact on the combat that's happening in the throne room between you and Lord Saxton. When your front rank collapses, it's still there. It's just not big enough to protect your center from the enemy infantry. Now they can overrun. And likewise, your rear, protects your center from enemy cavalry. Right? So you want to put units in your rear, but they don't really have a lot to do except they're the defensive unit. Your front are offensive and your rear is defensive. So you're probably going to want to put your levies in the rear, but you'll use maneuvers to move units back and forth. And that's it. Now that we have positioning and we have ranks and ranks can collapse. We don't have positioning within a rank. Doesn't matter where you put your units within a rank. It's not that tactical. It's still pretty abstract, but that simplifies the order of battle enough so that now a big part of who can attack who is just look at the battlefield. Just look at the battlefield. You can tell who can attack who. There's still some stuff to remember. It's not completely just all visual. That would be a legit war game, I think. But having to remember the order of battle was a big pain in the butt. Robert Paul, thank you for the $20. I am also looking forward to that. Ben Cornforth, pretty good, I would say, but not 100%. That's battle magic. Necromancers summoning, that's all going to be in the book. I want to summon a unit of, that's just straightforward battle magic. Oh, you want to hear how battle magic works? You guys are going to love this. This is so cool. I'm so happy with this. So battle magic, which there's some of in Strongholds and Followers, but this stuff's gonna be way better. Remember when we were talking about intrigue? Well, intrigue is not rounds of intrigue. Not like combat in D&D where I'm gonna act several times. An intrigue is one round. Between the point where we start screwing with Lord Saxton or he starts screwing with us, that starts the intrigue. It ends in the throne room. And we're taking actions. We get 4 actions plus 1 per level of our domain. So a first level domain gets 5 actions. We're going to take 5 actions over the course of this intrigue, and then we fight Lord Saxton in person. And it's up to the DM to control like the pacing of that. We have a lot of what I consider pretty good advice to make sure the Dungeon Master doesn't feel overwhelmed. How often do actions happen? But battle magic are spells that you cast during intrigue. That's my action. I'm the wizard in the organization. I'm gonna use my action to start summoning undead. When you do it during the intrigue, determines how powerful the unit of undead is. So you're like, hey, I want to go first because if I start casting this spell now, by the time we fight Lord Saxton, we're gonna have a huge unit of undead. And that, there's a cat behind me. Is that a cat or is that a cat statue? That's what I call the cat statue pose. It's a Vinci Prince. No one wants to talk about warfare anymore. Oh, okay, bye. He was done posing for camera. He's like, you got the shot, right? So yeah, that's super. So what's the word 10, Ryan McLarge Huge doing in that big McLarge Huge? Oh, 10 between the two factions. Is that a lot for one DM to juggle? No, the DM only has 5 actions for the entire intrigue, and that might take days or weeks of stuff happening. Like a good rule of thumb is, depending on the adventure you're running, you could have actions. You could have like 1 action per day. You could have 1 action per long rest. You could have 1 action per week, depending on the adventure you're running. You could have 1 action every time you ward experience. That I think is a pretty good one. Every time you ward XP, let the players take an action, let the enemy realm take an action. And that'll get you there. And by the way, you can adjust that knob. You can be like, well, it's been 1 per day, but I know you guys are about to fight Lord Saxton in the next 2 days, so we're going to speed it up. So no, I don't think it's 2. I think the fact that it's only 2 factions. Intrigue is us versus them. There's not This isn't Civ with a computer running dozens of factions. It's just us versus the bad guy. This adventure that we're playing, there is a bad guy at the end. There might be bad guys between now and then, in which case we'd have little nested intrigues, which is cool. I like that idea. I think that'd be really fun. But that would be a big, 256-page adventure. So yeah, Battle Magic is all about when did we start casting this? And I love that's something we don't have in D&D, of like these rituals where I have a whole team of mages that work for me. This is a whole organization, and we're going to be casting this spell. So I want to start casting it now. Wait. I want you to start casting it now, but we need to shore up our communication, because our communication is our defenses. That affects our skills. So the first action should be, let's buff our communications. Let's come up with and there's all sorts, each of these things just create all sorts of really cool narrative moments. Let's come up with some passphrases to use so that when Lord Saxon starts trying to get spies in our organization, it doesn't work. Yeah, that's great. In fact, let's come up with a whole language, a battle language. Great, let's teach it to our people. We're gonna make a roll, we buff our communications. And the wizard's like, wait, no. However, you can be proficient in domain skills. You can be proficient in lore, things like battle magic. You can be proficient in battle magic. And what that does is, if you're proficient in battle magic, you can act later in the intrigue, but your spell goes off like you went earlier. In other words, you get to add your proficiency modifier to your actual initiative for when you go. So it's like, no, that's fine. I'm the wizard. You go ahead and buff the communications. I'll go next. Because I got a 15 and I'm at +3, so it's like my spell started on 18. And then there's a chart, and it says, I think the chart already exists. We already have abilities like this for Lord Saxton, and we're going to deploy them for everybody soon. And I love that idea. That's super dramatic to me, the idea of all these wizards or druids or warlocks all working together to cast this spell. It could be multiple spells. Anyway. So I think that's it, folks. We've talked about intrigues. We talked about domains, kingdoms, warfare. Do I have any ideas for how to keep from stuttering? No. There are limits to my powers. What's to stop my players from taking their entire army and just sending them to clear out dungeons? So you gotta remember, like, a soldier is like a level 0 person. So yeah, if you want to go say, hey, my unit of light infantry, I've got too many people to feed. There's a dungeon, go clear it out. And then you're like, what happened to those guys? And why is everybody in this dungeon now much higher level? Well, because they killed all your there's a huge confusion of expectations if you imagine that the average pikeman in an army is the equivalent of like a 5th level paladin or something like that. That would be. So the intrigue is a countdown clock. That's exactly what it is, Dennis. It's we're gonna fight the Red Wizards of Thay sooner or later, and they know it. And so we start trying to sabotage each other in the lead up to a big final battle. Like, you could definitely take, like, if you recruited the Blue Dragon Flank, the Blue Dragon Phalanx, right, which is like six level paladin, Dragonborn paladins. If you recruited them, I would say not only these guys NPCs that will help you out, but they are also a unit. And if you wanted to send them to go clear out a dungeon, they would do it. However, it would have to be a dungeon that you couldn't clear out. So they would probably level up and come back with some cool magic items. Awesome. But they're not as good. You can only recruit people that are lower level than you. So they can only take on challenges that would be trivially easy for you. And that'll help them out. It's not going to help you out much. Kong versus Godzilla, who wins? Well, Godzilla, obviously. Godzilla is, after all, the king of the monsters. So, Ashpocalypse, what's to stop the enemy attacking the players right away? If the Dungeon Master, I have run a lot of D&D adventures, and they all have basically the same structure. It has never occurred to me to take the boss from the end of the adventure that you're supposed to fight after you've leveled up a couple times and just saying, you know what, I'm just going to have him show up right now and literally obliterate the players. You could already do that without Kingdoms and Warfare if you wanted to. If you wanted to say, the Aboleth God at the end of Night Below is just going to show up here while you're still 3rd level and literally kill all of you. I think you would be a very bad dungeon master, but you could do that. Alexander says that I should rip off other games. I'm not a huge fan of ripping off other games, especially modern games. I don't mind ripping off stuff that's old now that people don't know, but generally speaking, I think what people come to me for are my ideas. What people want to see is, how would Matt do this? And if you want to know how Blades in the Dark works, go read Blades in the Dark. So, do I have a specific domain power I'm dying to share? Traitor, we've got like, I think 24 different organizations that those are the subtypes. We've got like 24 different organizations we have planned. For the playtest, we've only developed 9 of them. And of those 9, the most dramatic ones are Traitor and Assassinate. So there's a whole bunch more cool ones, but I don't know what they are yet. Griggins, yeah, so that's probably a good sign that that it's time to stop. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. I thought this was a really good chat. We covered quite a lot of stuff. If you like this kind of stuff and you don't mind putting up with Twitch, I actually cannot tell the difference between Twitch streaming and YouTube streaming, but other people have highly developed ideas about it and they prefer one over the other. We live stream on Twitch a couple times a week. We might even do one tonight. It's Friday. We might even do one tonight. And you get a lot deeper a dive. You get way deeper dives into all this stuff, including people following the Twitch channel have watched the entire development of Kingdoms of Warfare, all the decisions I've made, all the crazy mechanics that I deployed and then threw out. And I think that live streams are good for that. I don't know how I would document it any other way than just me talking about what's going on. And at least once a week, we try to go on and just talk about the business of running MCDM and how that's going and the decisions we make and how everybody's doing. And all that kind of nonsense. So I strongly encourage you to come by Twitch/MCDM if you like this kind of engagement. I love doing stuff like this. Live chats are a great bang for buck way to engage with the community. And next week you're going to get another video, not a running the game video, a movie video. And then after that you're going to get another running the game video about traps, I think. So, is Night Below worth it? It's one of my favorite adventures, but it has a lot of structural problems. I think the modern version of Night Below is that adventure that starts in the Underdark, and I think that's why it starts in the Underdark, because that was a big problem with Night Below. So, no, Studded Studio. We try to stream on Mondays usually for the how are things going streams, and then if I just feel like streaming, we stream. All right, folks. And we do a lot of art previews. We didn't do an art preview this time, and we have actually quite a lot of art to show off these days. Excuse me. Tiny Cat I need to move the time writer because there's exactly enough space on that table for Tiny Cat to be able to lie down, but not enough to be able to fall asleep and not fall off. And so I just turned and literally saw Tiny Cat hanging off the time writer by her claws. So, thanks for hanging out, everybody. I thought this was a pretty good chat. And you guys are going to get more dope content coming up. More Kingdoms and Warfare. Patreon exclusive content coming September, October, I think. Chain of Acheron solo adventures coming soon. I did a lot of work on the Boots adventure. I'm pretty happy with it. And yeah. So I hope you folks are all safe. I hope you're all socially distancing, washing your hands for at least 30 seconds. Wear a mask when you go out. And hopefully at some point we get a vaccine for this and we can go back to normal. Until then, remember that the live stream sign off is different than the normal sign off. The live stream sign off is be seeing you.